Welcome back to Tacos and Trends, the podcast for Made Trends, where we explore the intersection of culture, consumer behavior, and the trends shaping tomorrow. You're listening to The Future is Fractional, our special series spotlighting the women redefining leadership across industries. Today's guest is a powerhouse. We're talking fashion, tech, operations, growth, and doing it all with intention. I'm thrilled to welcome April, the CEO of the board and a pioneer in a new era of fractional leadership. April, it's only fitting to have you here. You're really a founder in the fractional space. And I think as people are trying to understand what that space looks like, you're helping to draw that roadmap and educate fractional employees and fractional employment. So I'm excited to have you here today. Thank you so much. And I also just want to call out as well, it was very fitting whenever we had already started recording and I was introduced to you based on an article that you had written that went viral called The Future is Fractional. So many questions today. Thank you for being here. If you're listening and like what you hear, click like below or follow along.
Let's dig in.
Okay, so you've had tons of titles in your career. CMO, CEO, advisor, and now you're running all these, you're as CEO of the board, which we need to hear a lot of details. I need all the ins and outs, behind the scenes and front of the scenes of the board. Maybe just give me a little bit more information about yourself and how we ended up here today.
How we ended up here?
Yeah.
It's so great to be here. Obviously, your title is very compelling of this podcast. I actually have printed it on pens 4 years ago. So I love this universal connection. But I spent my years, started out in fashion, 25 years there. And I was last at DBF 9 years there. And I thought, how do I not become a 50-year-old Garmento and get off this bus? And how do I jump on the digital bus? And so I pivoted into technology, where I was the chief brand officer of a startup out of New York called Spring. We really saw ourselves as the future of fashion, the phoenix rising from the ashes. And I spent about 3 years there really helping evolve that platform and onboarding about 1,600 brands. And that was honestly where I had my first taste at the future, when I just saw how fractured and, quite frankly, gated everybody was building. And so would go from brand to brand to talk about this tech platform, and they would tell me all their other problems because I had been in their world. And it was just really clear, like, nobody's helping each other. There's no knowledge sharing. Everyone's making the same mistake down the street from each other. And so I had this idea of, how do I build Angie's List meets Tinder? Back then, here's my problem. Who can help me solve it? Swipe, swipe, swipe. And then how do you make that transactional? That was about 2014. And so it just got reinforced over and over. And I started to host fireside chats where I'd bring Jeff Rader from Harry's to talk to designers like Maria Cornejo, Ula Johnson, Rebecca Minkoff to talk about D2C. We would start to do collaborations across the model, where I'd have Mother Denim, every designer wear a t-shirt that all the proceeds went to a charity. And people were kind of confused by that. Like, why am I putting on a t-shirt of another brand and sending traffic to their site? And so it really, again, I just saw it so clearly how helping each other and sharing and supporting is just a missing link. And when I got to Violet Grey, I was the CEO there for 3 years, and it was about 135 brands, and everyone was constantly hitting me up for, do I know a president and this formulator, and can you introduce me to the sales agent? And so that had kind of been a side hustle across those industries for almost a decade. And so when the pandemic hit, it became really clear that, I was done where I was, and really just took a moment and thought, okay, where do I want to go next? What am I really good at? Watching the world change, during that time, which was really that moment of deep consideration sets as to what's really important, what really matters. And that's when you started to see this flood of talent, just like, F it, I'm out, and I was getting many, many texts from peers just saying, I left, I'm moving upstate, sold my company, got laid off. Moving to LA, I'm consulting. And so that was this moment for me to say, okay, now that remote is normalized, Zoom, et cetera, talent pool has never been stronger. How do we create a destination? Which is kind of what I built at Spring, and this idea of, really joining forces to be more powerful together. And that was the core ethos. And then ultimately being a place, a trusted phone call for people to check in with when they're like, shit, I need help. And it really started that simply. I thought we'd be about 30 people. We quickly got to 100 and some people. And I just had a freak out moment. I woke up one day just thinking of, oh my God, do I have 100 employees? What am I doing? What am I building? And it's just really been this evolution. And it's about 4 years now. And I feel like I've talked to at least 2,000 consultants, 500 brands, in this process. And that's been completely eye-opening and just reaffirming of the shift and where, both sides are rethinking.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. So, just to take a step back. So, basically, I think it's always interesting when people decide to like be like, okay, what am I going to do next? And then you really are like, okay, what are my superpowers? Right. So, it's
Yep.
like not only like, what am I really great at, but also what do I like to do? Because I think to coming from a similar world not everyone loves to be in the Garmento space forever. So, I think
Right.
when you can hit pause and be like, okay, what's the superpower? And it's interesting because I think, April, I think you're either like in one camp or the other. So I think we're
Hmm.
in the same camp, and that's why there feels like there's synergy here. I also feel like this: if someone calls and they want a recommendation or an introduction, I've always been like happy to make it. But I think there's a huge part of the industry and industries where people are like, oh no, like they will not give out contacts, they will not connect, where people are like just trying to protect their like little tiny
Yeah.
piece on the grid. And I think what's interesting is like creating a space like the board where they like where people can go and like feel supported as well, so that
Yeah.
they do feel like safe collaborating because they understand that there's like a piece for everyone.
Complete, and I saw that so much at Spring, where some designers, not to be named, would be like, why would I send anyone to Spring? I need to send them to my website. I said, it's
Yeah.
basically like you open a store in the mall and you're getting the traffic from everybody else. You purposely put your store there for that traffic. So
Yeah.
other people were like, of course, I'm going to send and I'm going to get. Like, that's how it works. And so for me, it's a big criteria of who comes into the community is, nobody with that scarcity gated mindset. To me, it's about ambition and generosity, not being mutually exclusive anymore. And that's where you start to realize there's plenty for everybody. There's so much. And that is actually exponential when you do bring those together. And in the beginning, when I was kind of talking to people about the board, I had met with someone at Blackstone, and he looked at the roster and he's like, how did you get all these people that should be in competition to come together? And he was really kind of blown away. And I was surprised by how blown away he was, because to me, it's just been such an organic part of the way I function. And,
Yeah.
and definitely, there are definitely people like, why would I give you my contacts? I'm like, why wouldn't you? Like, I'm not going to
Yeah.
steal your job. It's really
Yeah.
interesting to think about the paying it forward piece that we've both done for decades. And honestly, it was one of the things. And as I sat there, like post Violet Gray, I was interim CEO at On to Beauty at the time, was helping them kind of navigate. They had been a physical business and were now trying to figure out digital during the pandemic. Trying to get them a good CEO, and really just looking at, this mindset piece of it completely. And also what's in me that allowed me to make all those network connections over decades, is the integrity of those relationships, and definitely they're to be protected. But it is also very much like you become this really trusted resource. The more you're willing to say, who you should talk to, what would be great. I have an
Yeah.
idea for you. You should meet them. And, with those no strings attached, at the same time, we're at this generation where we want to monetize everything we've done, right? We are looking at jobs changing, budgets changing, salary shifting, et cetera, and life is just getting more expensive. And so, on the other side of 50, you start to see incomes go down and expenses flat or go up. And, navigating what's the next 10, 20 years look like when no one's retiring at 65, and ultimately, what can you monetize of what you've built and done? And so, definitely the superpower skill set in the fractional world of being able to kind of take that into companies and have real impact across multiple companies. And there's so many other upsides with that constant upskilling and learning with each project that is powerful. But also, you've built these networks over time that are monetizable. And I think, men do it a little bit more than women. There's
That's
definitely kind of
exactly what I was gonna
exchanges
say.
that happen, and women are very just like, yes, of course, how can I help? And at the same time, you really earn those relationships. So building that into our model where it very much is a referral fee that we pay. So if someone brings an opportunity, they get paid on that opportunity. In the same way, I might just like, oh my gosh, I have a friend who'd be great for that job. You make that connection and there's no, ROI on that. It's very easy to say, hey, I built this into our model and we have opportunities we share, and everybody is incentivized to bring work to each other. And so that was, a significant shift. And some people are still like, well,
Yeah.
why would I pay for an opportunity? But my husband's a photographer and, has had an agent forever. And that's a big part of how those worlds work, right? There's someone hustling and pulling it all together, and, everybody's benefiting. But doing it as a collaborative is, I think, something that's been really a bit of a shift on any kind of those agency models. And it really is going back to like, how can we all win?
No, exactly. And I think so many things to unpack there. I think one, it's true that like that space didn't exist the same for women. I think like, I think it felt like in my experience, it's been like, okay, like it's been a little bit of like the game of like the successful woman has been very much like clawing your way through to be like, okay,
Yeah.
this is my spot. And so I think though now there has been big enough shift where there's like enough women in positions where we're like, well, we don't really want to do that. I think by nature, women are
Yeah.
like more collaborative. But it's true. I feel like almost before it felt like you would have to like apologize for like asking for like that like collaborative like piece, unlike how men do business. And so I
Yeah.
love this like this disruption. Can I take it one step back, April? Just because part
Yeah.
of what we were trying to do with the series as well is what we realized whenever we launched the series of like the future is fractional is that we have like a variety of different listeners. And because of part of this new workforce, there's like a certain like generation of workforce that may have never had a corporate job or have had no access. So there, could you just maybe for our listeners who don't know, could you give us a breakdown of how C-suite works? Basically, over the
Mhm.
series, we've been interviewing someone from each like role. But I feel like as our expert here on like as in speaking from the role of like a CEO, could you maybe just like give us a quick breakdown? So what the CEO's role is like in a nutshell,
Right.
and then kind of what the org looks like under it, as
Yeah.
people are thinking to fill that in as well.
Yeah. And, and it's definitely changing. So, so I was the CEO at Violet Gray. We had about 25 people on the staff. And, it's funny when I was offered the job, I wasn't really looking for that job. I called one of my friends who was also a CEO and I said, "Oh my gosh, can I do this?" And he's like, "Dude, it's just chief cheerleader." And I was just like, "Really? Okay, I can totally do that." 6 months in, I called him like, "You're such a liar. It is not just chief cheerleader. It is so much more." And
There's
so,
a few more
the
details.
challenge with this type of a role is that it can be a pretty lonely role. And so the reality is that you're in charge of all problems are your problems and everybody's personal problems are your problems, right? So it kind of the buck stops with you,
Mhm.
which I learned the hard way. But ultimately, and you're actually, sometimes managing your investors, and you're also managing your team and your staff, and you're trying to figure out the way to move the business forward and also be mindful of everybody's individual needs and career paths. And, it's definitely a lot. And I think it's a lot of why people burn out in the C suite, and quite frankly, in many roles, there's a lot of politics involved, which is the bummer side of corporate. And so, um, the org generally, depending on clear lines of ownership is you generally have your ops world. So that can be, logistics, generally technology and finance also kind of fall under there. Your marketing team, your creative team, your sales team, your business team, and then all the things that support that. So whether it's, under marketing, email, site, merchandising, social media, etc. And for the Violet Gray was the buying side who work with the brands, the planning, the open to buy, the scheduling, the managing the complete P&L on that, as well as been working with logistics for shipping, et cetera. So it's kind of bringing it all together. And certain people own certain KPIs across each one that ladder up into the total goals of the company. So your operating plan generally is where you've mapped out, like, this is our projected sales, this is our projected costs. And that's what the CEO is trying to navigate all the time. And then also look to the future, right? And so one of the hard parts of business today is that it's shifting so much, right? All of a sudden the tariffs happen and then everything's like, and have to go the other way. And it's really hard for big companies to be agile and nimble in that way. Smaller companies can kind of flex a little bit more. And generally, a lot of people are wearing lots of hats. As you get bigger, obviously, you're able to afford to really kind of build teams around, who needs a boss and who needs support underneath them. And that's really where the org starts to grow. And in many cases, it needs a reset. And I think this is hard for companies to kind of take a step back and say, do we have the people here who got us here? And are they going to get us there? And this is what I really learned in tech. They're a little bit more brutal in this way, where it's really just like, the founding team at Spring, we were told by one of our investors, great job, you brought it to life. Half of you probably couldn't get a job here if you interviewed today. And you're like, what? But you start to realize just how
Straight from morale.
quickly expectations and the skills needed change as the business
Yeah.
changes. And that was a really crazy eye opener for me because I was like, wait, you mean I couldn't get a job here and I built this whole company? But it starts to happen as these companies grow, as they bring in, the quote unquote experts, sometimes not the best move. And this is where I think fractional is really powerful because as you start to look at each new stage of growth. So if you start, let's say, a D2C brand and all of a sudden you're thinking, okay, now we're going to go into wholesale, or we're going to, go into a whole other category, or we're thinking of doing something we've never done in terms of, experiential or marketing, or we're going to open our first store, like all those things, you generally look around the room and you're like, we don't have anybody here who does that.
Yeah.
And so in this growth cycle, you generally, you can get someone to punch above their weight who's on the team. You can hire for it. In many cases, you're not quite sure where you're going yet. Or, this is where I think fractional is so brilliant because you can bring somebody in as if they were full time, the definition of fractional as I see it is, a fraction of their time for a fraction of the cost. But ultimately
Yeah.
you're getting that full person, everything they know, everyone they know, all the ways that they would approach that project. And it's very focused on a certain goal. And so instead of, own it all like the CEO does, the CEO can bring in someone to literally say, like, help us launch on Amazon, help us do our first product line, and take these new first swings. And in parallel with the company where, they're not a threat. And that ends up happening a lot when like the experts do come in, everyone who's been there and has been building is threatened. And this is where the politics get a little
Yeah,
crazy.
exactly.
And the way I see fractional is they're no ego, they're not coming in, they're not trying to get the year end bonus. They're not trying to get your job. They're really coming in to help move the needle. And as a leader, who has hired consultants before, the ones that are one way or the other. There's consultants have had a bad rap for years. You tend to think expensive and don't really do anything because they'll leave you a strategy, but then, it sits on someone's desk
Yeah.
unexecuted for 6 months. And so the beauty of fractional is they also do execute. And so
Yeah.
you're really getting, just a partner in that way. And in many cases, an objective thinker where sometimes you're in the business in the weeds, and definitely happened to me by the gray where it's hard to look to the future when you're literally keeping the lights on,
Yeah. On the day to
managing the
day.
teams. And so the org to me, what's shifting, and this is what I hear from a lot of companies, is those entry level jobs are getting, a little bit strangled because these mid level jobs are kind of picking up those in the way that technology is shifting things. And so it'll be really interesting to watch over the next couple of years. And then also, the next generation doesn't really want to work at the company for 5 years. They really want to come get what they need and kind of move on, or even work more in a freelance capacity. And so I
Definitely.
think there's a lot of implications for how to organize people that aren't staying. How do you
Yeah.
invest in people, train them, knowing that they're going to bounce pretty soon? And so
Yeah.
just having that expectation built in, and again looking at kind of this upper tier of talent that also doesn't want to sit at the top of the org, for the next 5 years, and really have an HR role, but getting back to having real impact. And so those ends are really blurred right now, and I feel like that CEO of the company is a little bit like, how do I rethink? And I had a
Yeah.
conversation the other day with a CEO at a big beauty brand, probably like $100 million brand. And she was just like, I just had to clean house. Like no one was right. And now I'm starting all over. And I hear that more and more where
Yeah.
over time, certain roles, people, the roles outgrow the people. And it's really the hardest part of the job is really thinking through who do you need for the business today and the business in 6 months and the business a year from now. And that static org is just no longer working.
I love that. And I think it makes a lot of sense. So tell me, so there's two, for me, there's like two sides of the board. There's
Mhm.
the members and then there's the companies who would approach you. So who's a member? How do you become a member?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me
Yeah.
everything.
So, the membership, it's funny because like I said, it really evolved organically. And honestly, we moved to a paid membership model about a year in when I realized I had this insane roster of hugely talented people, but no one had really incentive to participate in any other way than wait for the phone to ring. And that was
Oh,
not
okay.
interesting for me to build.
Yeah.
If I was setting out to build an agency, I would have done it very different, in that sense of just getting talent work. What I really set out to do was to join forces, to go after things collaboratively, to be able to kind of build SWAT teams. And so when we helped Farfetch launch Beauty, there was 7 of us for 10 months, supporting that project. Same with Moda Operandi. We helped them, build their model around their beauty category and then, bring it to life. And those things were where I saw a big value. And so quickly I realized, okay, in order for someone to feel invested, they have to invest. And
Yeah.
so membership really became about that, is having some skin in the game, knowing it's not for everybody, but those are the people that are like, you know what, I'm in, I'm going to bring it, I'm going to use it, I'm going to collaborate, I'm going to help in all the ways. And so I always joke that we're, the black Amex of, LinkedIn as
Love it.
one caveat, but then we're also a food co-op. And I feel like the food co-op model, stands out more because that
Yeah.
is really like how, if you can help, you help, you need to show up for each other. And so when someone is like, has anyone ever used this platform or, work with this agency, or does anyone have a good Wikipedia writer? Someone's like, yes, here, me. And so
Yeah.
that's the piece when you leave a company and you lose those internal resources and
Yeah.
it is just you, there's going to be stuff coming up all the time that you've never done. Your team did
No,
it, or,
it's true.
it didn't exist a year ago and now you've got to figure it out. And so, especially in the world of AI, the constant upskilling is really a necessity. So leaning across a community of experts where people share their kind of A game knowledge in a way that we can all have the cheat sheet, but then we can go deeper. Going back to like why we moved to paid membership, And then ultimately, I've always saw this as capping around like 250, 280 in order to really get to know each other and to collaborate. And we really hover around that number. I think I had 100 applications last month. And so really what I do there is look at, who's really bringing something new to the community that we don't have, new knowledge, new networks. That's how we all evolve. And then if they're connected to other members, it's, a super plus because there's already an innate recommendation engine that I can tap into there. And they generally feel like, okay, we're like-minded thinkers because I know that person for 20 years, or we worked together 10 years ago here, here, and here. And that just brings a different, level of connection. And we can't be everything to everybody. And so I
Yeah.
also know kind of where we're really focusing on. We have a lot of beauty fashion from my last two industries,
Yeah.
definitely technology, innovation, media, but, doing like healthcare and hospitality, it just starts to get really broad. And so I've
Yeah.
learned the hard way bringing people in that, I'm like, you're really interesting. I don't know that you're a fit. And we had someone who did facial recognition technology and I was just like, this may not be your group. But he's like, I just want to learn. So we had him do a lunch and learn and it was mind blowing. And he was, totally this genius. And then 6 months in, he's like, I don't really know that this is my space. I'm like, it's all good, And so, but it was, we've had a couple outliers that are just
Yeah.
kind of completely off the beaten path of what, majority of us are focused on, and continue to kind of trial and error there. But that is really the criteria, and then it's kind of my gut. And so I meet with every single person. I spend about 30 to 40 hours on calls with people, so navigating that and then making sure it's a fit for everybody on both sides. So if I'm going to recommend somebody, I really want to know them, and want someone else who knows them. And so I think that's the difference of a marketer hire type model where there's just a lot of people and the AI is telling you, this is a fit. And so I see us as almost more of a white glove talent matching service.
Yeah.
And what I love more than anything is when I'm talking to someone, I'm like, oh my God, they're going to love Molly. It's just like, I
Yeah.
just feel it in my bones. And that goes back
Yeah.
to what we've been doing for decades is connecting
Yeah.
people organically.
Yeah.
And so building that piece in too, because then the experience is even, 10 times greater than just, can they do the work?
No, definitely, definitely. And then, okay, so that's if you're a member, and then if you're looking to make a hire, like a fractional
Yeah.
hire, how does that work exactly? So if I'm coming to you and I'm looking for you just to like walk our like listeners through it, like is
Yep.
are you the point of contact? Is there a project lead? Who's scoping it? How's it getting paid for?
Yep. Yep. So I'm definitely the point of contact on a lot.
Okay.
People will reach out online and we have a brief to fill out and that allows us to see, okay, do I need to have this first phone call or can we send it right to someone who I think would be the
Yeah.
best candidate and just save them another phone call?
Yeah.
Lots of times companies just don't know what help they need. And so we'll get an inbound of like, I need help with marketing. I'm like, okay. And so we do a lot of brand therapy or I'll hop on the call and really kind of get a sense of what their pain points are. And what I think people really mistake is titles. And so someone will email me like, I need a CMO or a CEO. I'm like, okay, let's just look at the problem you're trying to solve. Because generally, the title doesn't matter. And at this point, some of those titles are just so ambiguous that they come with a lot of expectations. And so we try
Yeah.
to be really, really clear and the scoping becomes a huge piece of that. And so once we determine, okay, this is what you need. We are democratic in the way that I share the opportunities across the board. Sometimes it's super clear, like it's definitely one of these three people, see if they're available, make that connection. And then it's really the member hops on a call and understands more because they're the best one to talk about how they would approach this project and other things that they could bring to the table, et cetera. So we really kind of get out of the way unless we're building a
Okay.
dream team. And then I really
Okay.
kind of manage the curation on that. And sometimes another member will say like, oh my God, I have this new client. It's bigger than me. I need help with crisis PR and I need someone to work e-com strategy. And so we'll grab like two more people, and attach them there. But generally that's also kind of shared across the community. Making sure that people don't miss opportunities. And once we make that connection, like I said, they then put the scope together and then we kind of navigate, any other thing that they need. And we've had a lot of companies that start with what we call a blue sky brainstorm, which I think is
Okay.
one of our most amazing products because again, having been in that leadership seat of sometime looking to the future and being like, I could go this way, I could go that way. I want to go there, but I'm not quite sure how to go there. And so those opportunities allow us to kind of curate the talent gaps around a kind of think tank roundtable situation. And we spend a couple hours just like deep diving into where they're trying to get to, kicking the tires and making recommendations. And then we kind of go away and expand on those recommendations and come back to them. In many cases, they'll say, amazing, you validated these 5 things. We got these. Can you take these 3? Or great, can you help us? And it really just allows for, kind of some level setting But companies just, it's really hard to take a moment and really take a breath and say, where are we and where are we trying to get to? You know, you're just moving so fast all the time, and having real objective thought leaders at the table, bringing things you may not have thought about, like the know before you go. So one of our clients is an in skincare brand called Caldera, and they were moving from performance and Amazon into wholesale, and they wanted to rebrand. They needed help with, kind of marketing, brand marketing, which they had only done performance, kind of paid marketing. And then they also wanted to really think about the retail strategy, et cetera, et cetera. So, we brought in 5 members who leaned into all those areas, and just listening to a conversation where someone who has been in this position for decades, one of our members, was the DM of Nordstrom's Beauty, and she has a business that helps a lot of these emerging brands be successful at retail. So as we know, getting the PO is just one piece. Being successful, for the next couple of years is a whole other thing. So as someone going in a path you've never gone before, you just don't know. And so for
No, it's
someone to
true.
say, FYI, once you're in, these are the things you're going to need to remember that you need to, be prepared for. That's kind of invaluable intelligence.
Yeah.
And
No,
so what we try
definitely.
and do is make that kind of brainstorm session be valuable on its own if we don't go further on projects. And it also it's just like kind of light bulbs start to go off pretty quickly across the leadership team, and they're involved. So you don't have that, okay, the experts are telling us now what to do,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so getting that
Like an
buy-in
early
and being
buy-in.
part of that is really critical. These are just all things that we've all experienced over decades in our own careers. And so to me, it's like reimagining, what we wish we had in those seats in terms
Yeah.
of partners. And then, on the flip side of how our members want to, evolve their own careers. I'll just say fractional is a hustle. It's definitely not for everybody. And so we definitely have members who, if the right full-time job came up, they might go back in. We've had members go back
Yeah.
in and leave 3 months later and say, like, this is my kryptonite, I can't do it. And then we've had members build new companies, like completely launch brands, or, go back in and, take CEO roles, et cetera, and stay part of the group because, the intelligence that's being shared is really powerful. But like anything in life, you get out what you put in. And so I
No,
feel like
totally.
all of us need to know there's no silver bullet, magic pill,
Yeah,
magic.
no, I think it's true because I think that's what like I've talked about this like a million times, like from like a more like comedic like standpoint, is that I think when like you work on your own, whether you're a freelancer, you're fractional, you have your own side hustle, whatever it is, I think everyone thinks it's like this amazing thing because they're like, oh, if I worked for myself, but you're like, you don't ever actually, if people are paying you, you don't ever actually work for yourself. You work for the people who are paying you. And the amount of like
Yep.
hustle, I think like you were saying, when you exit like a big company, you suddenly realize how many resources you no longer have that now you have to pay to have or like hustle to have.
Yep.
And also
Yeah.
I think and the heavy lift of like biz dev, I think people underestimate that. Like it's like
Completely.
it's like easy to go out on your own when you have someone asking you to do projects, but when you finish those
Yeah.
projects, then you're like, okay, what are we going to do now?
I
It's like,
know. Okay, so this is also why the community model for me is a bit of a game changer there. And so what I look at and why I named it, we are the board, and is really this collective. And so when you are prospecting, when you are checking back in with a former client or a peer that has a role at a company that could potentially bring you in, to me was always much safer and easier, and quite frankly, less personal to say, I'm part of this collective. I'd love to hop on a call and hear, what you're working on and how we can help, right? Where your challenges are versus, hey, I do brand strategy. Do you need brand strategy? You know what I
yeah,
mean? And
totally,
so that to me, that conversation, like who's not going to have that conversation? Like, wait,
totally.
there's a whole group of people who could help me. Let me think about what I'm focused on. And,
Yeah,
because it's already a warm relationship. And so when you think about just the networks we've already amassed and the people we already know, just starting to reimagine, like reaching out to 5 people that are friendlies, right, is so much easier than cold calling, and cold calling never works in the end.
yeah.
But
No,
ultimately, there's already a trust, but now you're bringing you plus, and now you're bringing value that, is beyond you. And so if you
no,
talk to a company and they're like, you know what, we're actually marketing is fine, but finance is a mess. We're like, we have amazing, fractional CFOs as a resource. You're even that much more valuable to your
yeah,
network. And so
no,
those are the distinctions I think that are different.
no, I think so as well. And I think it's interesting when you talk about this, like Angie, I was like dying the first time you said that to me, like Angie's List, which I love. Angie's List, like meets Tinder. I think that's amazing because I think, and you mentioned a few of these things already. When you do need to network, like I think LinkedIn is a great tool, but it is, I mean, I'm getting so much spam, I can't even open
Oof,
LinkedIn most of the time. It's great,
completely.
like, if you know how to engage, but I think it's not all of, and I think you look there and, like, every single person's a founder and every single person's a CEO. It's, like, hard to cut, it's like a full-time job,
Yeah.
like, to cut through the weeds, I feel like there. And it does feel like people are looking for, like, everything in life to be, like, more curated, more, like, personalized so that they can actually make, like, can actual, like, connections. I know that's what we saw whenever we started here with Tacos and Trends, was like much more than we had expected or planned. Kind of like a sub happening was people were so happy to have, like, real connections and, like, actually talk about things. And the amount of,
Yeah.
like, side projects for other people that, like, popped off because of that, just because it's
Yeah.
true. I mean, no one's answering cold calls. No one's answering, like, the amount of, like, email spam. And so I think
Yeah.
having a reference. So one more question about how you, so if we come and we hire fractional work from you, who are we paying? We are the board, or we're paying the individuals
Again,
or various?
depending how the members want to structure it. So we definitely can,
Okay.
manage all the invoicing and accounting. I prefer someone else to be chasing down the money than me, to be honest.
Yeah.
It changes the
Understood.
relationship when you're
Yeah.
like, I'm on my one-on-one. I'm like, and by the way, you guys haven't paid me for last month. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's really like you kind of need that church
Awkward.
and state. So
Totally.
we provide that. We definitely do that on Dream Team. So we have
Okay.
a 4-person team right now doing a transformation for a big fashion brand. It's it's a 5-week project, cut into 2 different payment terms. So we, do that. And then the members, we tell them invoice us for this number and then we, pay them out.
Okay.
That's been, and initially, quite frankly, I just thought like everybody would want that service. And a lot of people are like, I have my own accounting team. I have my own invoicing system. Like I'm good. And so we made it,
Oh, okay.
completely optional
Okay.
after some time where people were like, oh, this is kind of messing up my system. So especially if you're like a
Okay.
fractional CFO, you pretty much have your, your stuff dialed
Yeah.
in terms of invoicing.
Yeah.
But it's funny when someone moves into consulting and they're just getting their LLC or they're just starting to get their
Yeah.
website going. They've now changed their email 3 times, and so we're constantly like, wait, we have 4 emails, what's happening? And, helping them navigate that shift where all of a sudden now it's a personal brand. And now it's like, how do I get out into the world? Like, how do I talk about myself? Some people are really easy doing that. Other people hate it, behind the scenes people. And so we have a third pillar of the business, which is really the content pillar. And that to me is I kind of look at every member. I kind of look at the board like a magazine from that perspective, and every member is a contributor. And so what that allows us to do is really elevate the thought leadership that's here and allow for members to have an asset that they might be easier to cross promote versus create on
Oh,
their
that's
own.
great.
And then we're able to, we have a few channels. We just launched our Substack, which has been great. And that's really kind of where we're doing a more behind the scenes look at, the life of the members, but also what they're seeing and feeling that's less tactical, like how to think about SEO, right? Like, and that
Yeah.
kind of lives on our LinkedIn. And so we have two
Yeah.
sides of that, which goes back
Okay.
to the whole person in the world right now. And what kind of repelled us from corporate is that sense of now I just got to drop everything that is me at the door, walk in, put my
Definitely.
armor on, get through my day, drop it back off, and what you see in terms of people that have moved to fractional is like, I can pick up my kid from school. I can be here and I'll do hours at night. And,
Yeah.
that obviously remote changed for everybody, but when it's, your business and what I try and explain to brands who are just like, yeah, but are they really accountable and how much, do they really care? And I'm like, first of all, no one on your P&L is 100% like loyal and
Yeah.
accountable in the way
Yeah.
that you think. Cause I've run P&Ls and I know a member and I know how, where and when people like stop and start. And at the same time, their whole business is really going to be successful based on referrals and testimonials, and
Definitely.
case studies. And so they're going to show up, they're going to get the job done. And in most cases, they over deliver. The other side of that is scope creep, which also does happen, and
Yeah.
so we have a lot of conversation kind of hacks around what members are doing to prevent that. Like, those kind of 3-month check-ins with the client, like, are we still on track? Have we added new things? Do we need to relook at the budget? Because it really happens. And all of a sudden now you have a full-time job, but you're getting paid for a part-time job.
Fractional.
And
Yeah.
that is the downside of
Happens to the best of us.
fractional. Happens because you can do it, so you're going to do it, but you're like, wait, that wasn't on the scope. And quite frankly,
Yeah.
like now I'm in it 30 hours a week.
Yeah.
And generally most people have a couple clients happening at once. And so navigating that, one of our members, this goes back to the knowledge sharing of the community. She's like, oh, no, 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 I get an extra 5K if they put me on Slack. And everyone was like, what? And she's like, it makes them think and say, do I really need them on Slack? Because once
Yeah.
you're on Slack, then you're expected to answer to everybody. And now that can be like, 3 hours of your day.
Yeah.
And so that particular thing, like 10 people were like, oh my God, I'm adding this to my SOW like right now. And
Yeah.
so, how we're all evolving, the best practices is one thing. And then, on the company side, I talked to people who are like, how should I be thinking about this? We just placed an interim CMO at a fashion brand here in LA, and it's a 3-month project while a new CEO is coming in, and she wants them to be able to build their team. And so we just need an adult in the room to keep the lights on for the next 3 months and also help
Yeah.
us with this, this get through the season. And the criteria was XYZ plus location plus plus plus. And sometimes, we don't have the right talent because of all those things. But in this particular
Yeah.
case, we had 3 amazing options. And the board member who was working with us was just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And by the way, I think I want to get on the board. I'm like, come on, And so
I
like
love
a
it.
lot of times it also happens that way where someone's like, wait, this is the model and this is so interesting. And it was so helpful for me. And now like you did my job in a way that I was out there, DMing people on LinkedIn to try and find a fit or trying to find a recruiter who would help me do a 3-month placement.
Yeah.
Um, and then, interesting enough, I've had this recent conversation with this woman at FEMA who is looking to kind of evolve, everything in the paid maternity leave aspect of like working, my brain's not working, but just like paid the working family act, I forget what it was
Yeah.
called, where we tried to get a lot of things in there that we didn't, but ultimately under this new administration, realizing the trigger words that need to come out and what needs to go in. And so when you think about mat leave, paternity leave, any kind of life event leave, it's obviously really challenging on companies, to lose senior people. And so there's a huge opportunity for fractional to step in, in those areas. And we've actually been asked a few times recently to backfill the maternity role and help the business continuity, which to me becomes like, okay, this is a completely new talking point for fractional because it is really something that is powerful, and that balls are going to drop in those months. You're going to put someone's whole job on someone else at the company in the meantime, but then it's also how do you get someone who's going to really kind of step in seamlessly and, and also know that they're temporary, right? Like that's a
Yeah.
piece too. And so
Yeah. They're like
that
knowing
was
you're
really
temporary.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
Exactly.
and it's just the best thing is just that the scope is really clear. The minute the scope is gray, the whole project's gray. And so that's a learning curve. We all F up one or two and be like, okay, next time I have to
Or
put that
10.
in there.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah,
10.
it takes
Um,
a few times. No, it's true, it's true. I think as well, like, I always say, like, at like, how we work is, like, it's an interesting, like, perspective when you're like, "Oh, okay, we're going to sign this contract, we're going to be retained for this long," but, like, all permitting that everything goes well, we should, like, put ourselves out of business, right? Like, that's, like, a hard
yeah.
mentality if you're, like, an overachiever to, like, accept as well that you're like, "Oh, I'm going to, like, constantly be, like, putting myself out of business," and I think to your point, like, over-delivering and then,
Yeah.
like, being like, "Okay, but now let me leave this with you."
Yeah. Well, and then the last thing, like I'll kind of say for people thinking about going fractional, right now it's a world of specialists.
Yeah.
Generalists are having a harder time. As someone who I hate to say like sells talent, right? Like there's a part of me that I am saying like, oh, these would be great. It's really challenging for me when an opportunity comes in and I'm like, is that what they do? I can't really tell because
Oh, yeah.
either they
Yeah,
have a
that's
million skill sets picked on the,
yeah,
and the way that we do our applications, or what their LinkedIn bio is so esoteric. I'm like, I still don't know what you do.
yeah,
And people kind of make that mistake, right? They're trying to paint the biggest picture of themselves to go out there to get more business, but in reality, they handicap themselves because they're just not really clear on the problems that you're
yeah.
solving. And
Yeah,
we call
exactly.
them, painkiller statements, and, versus like a vitamin that's a nice to have. You would be great if
Yeah,
we could use you, but we can't really, we can't justify it versus like, holy crap, we need you. And
yeah,
that's the part where it can take months to really kind of fine tune that piece, especially when you've done a lot of things,
yeah,
and can do a lot of things. But there's got to be, should be one thing that you can literally go in to a company and execute on and have an impact and then focus on, kind of the narrative around that. And that's where when they get on the call, they can also talk about other things that they could touch on, which
yeah.
generally happens. But they're usually looking for one big problem to be solved. And that's really where I think even if someone's searching on LinkedIn to find it, right? That
No,
you're,
it's true.
that
And I think it's that because I think everyone's, like, keyword optimized, like, SEO optimized, like, on LinkedIn specifically, right? So you're like, how do you I agree, it's, like, very difficult to find and, like, cut through that. I like this as well, like, what's, like, the like, I always it's, like, an old but, like, this idea of, like, literally, like, what's the one superpower that you feel so confident
yeah,
in that you can, like, execute over and over and over? Like, we even say that when we're selling our services. There's, like, a lot of things we can do, but, like, this is our magic.
yeah.
This we can do day in, day out and, like, show ROI.
Yeah. In some cases, it's like, I have an audit that I do. Like I have an actual, like I come in, all these things, like I can clearly show you what you're going to get at the end of this, 4 weeks. That's then going to lead into X. And so many members have kind of figured out how that kind of first phase looks and then kind of build
Yeah.
on there. Um, I think, people, like, we just did another placement where it was like, let's start with 6 months and then we'll go month to month if it works. And that's a fractional president role. And so in that case, members can move full time, and we've done some full time placements too. And then our model around that is that we take a percentage of the first year salary. But if a member brought that opportunity, and we split that 50-50, we split it 50-50 with anybody who finds the talent. And so that to me is also like going to our networks and being
Yeah.
able to monetize our networks that way. And we placed a CEO at Jonathan Simkai, and one of our members got $30,000, and that was just introducing her friend.
Yeah.
So when you think about the power of our networks, they're already vetted. You have a sense of like, oh my God, I have a friend who's so miserable here and she'd be amazing there. And it goes into just like opening those doors and those conversations.
Definitely.
Um,
Definitely.
but I've realized like incentivizing as many ways possible. Otherwise it's like, I'll take a look at the JD, and if I know someone, maybe you
Yeah.
throw in, an economic advantage, and you're like, do I know somebody? This
Yeah.
could
Like,
be,
let
who
me
do I
think.
know that this would be great for,
Yeah.
and then it's the win-win-win. But
April, I'm going to
yes.
go through, as we wrap up here, I'm going to go through, we like a
Okay.
lightning round at the end.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay. So founder focus, like quick, like lightning round of advice. One question every founder should ask before hiring a fractional exec.
Ooh, let's see. That's so good. I think it's, oh man, there's so many. Shoot, I'm getting my brain of
We'll
like
look back. It's
hiring.
no,
No,
it's
no, it's
broad.
really, it's so good. Yeah, it's broad, but it's
Okay.
really like, to me, it'd be how much you know about my company. You know what I mean? If
Oh
people
yeah.
are coming in and not doing their research, that's a problem.
Yeah. It's like a red
Same way
light,
if you're
right?
hiring for full time. Yeah.
Okay, great. The most overlooked part of brand building right now, as you see it.
I think it's really just being so clear on your why. I think people sometimes know they're filling a product void and they have an opportunity, but just like the why matters all the way through. And many times you have to go back and figure out what your why was, especially if you started just selling stuff on TikTok. But
Right.
yeah, what the why is key. Why you're doing this? Why does anyone care? Why does anyone need it? Like that's such a critical piece, and it's shocking how many people jump that step.
Haven't done that piece.
Mhm.
Okay. One thing from your corporate days you'll never do again.
Overstay my welcome.
Okay. Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
that's
I tended to
a lot of
stay too
unpacking
long.
there.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of, like I'm like, oh, I should have left 2 years before. But yes, I think falling
And
into
then,
that security trap.
yeah, when it's like not really like the right fit anymore. And then, what's your one secret whenever you have so many pieces going on as like a busy woman? What do you do to make sure, like, what's like one non-negotiable to like recharge and like recover?
I try and do a hike every morning. I'm in Laurel Canyon, and it's 3 minutes outside my front door. I have this beautiful canyon hike, and so that is my non-negotiable. It's literally on my schedule. That
Little
says
grounding first thing in the morning. Very
yes, yeah,
LA.
yeah.
I love it.
Very LA. And when I go to New York, I try and go on the West Side Highway, and that's my thing. I
Okay.
wake up and I walk to the water and I just go back and forth. It's generally a podcast moment, a music moment. But if I don't move kind of first thing, I know I won't do it later.
Yeah. No, you have to get it out of the way. And lastly, what's your go-to taco order?
Ooh, I'm like a good, like just chicken tinga type girl. I discovered Loki, which I don't know if you've been there
Oh
yet,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
it was so delicious that I know I'm like, okay, this might become an obsession. But yeah, pretty chicken, spicy. I also black bean guacamole.
Love it.
I could eat tacos every single day.
No,
So
me too. Me too. Me too. Okay, and just tell our listeners again really fast, and we'll put all the links below. What's the best way to find you, learn about you, hear about you, read about you? Tell us everything.
yeah, I mean, LinkedIn DMing me there is I'm on it all the time. Also, the board website, you can go directly. There's to join for membership is a link there, as well as if you're looking for some talent in a project. Both links are on our website, and so I'm starting to move to kind of open houses for membership, just to kind of manage a little bit of my bandwidth. And so we took a bit of a break in August. We have an open house coming that I'm just going to do what I do with every member on a call, kind of cut through the what it is, and then those who are still interested after, I'll do kind of shorter one-on-ones with.
Oh,
But
smart.
by applying through the website, you'll get an invitation to an open house, and kind of go from there.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much,
Amazing.
April.